Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their advice. If you'd like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. This is, I believe, episode 126 of Autism Stories. And for this podcast, or I think just about any podcast, there are bound to be themes that develop when there have been that many episodes. One of the biggest themes for this podcast has been women that aren't diagnosed until they are adults. That's definitely got me to think more about issues relating to women and how I can share these issues and stories on this podcast. One of those issues specifically is relating to the menstrual cycle and how periods look and feel like, and how to manage hygiene and pain for autistics. That's why I'm thrilled to talk with Robyn Steward today, who wrote the book, The Autism Friendly Guide to Periods. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Robyn, thanks so much for joining us on Autism Stories today.
Thanks for having me.
Wanted to start out like I do with so many of these episodes and learn, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Well, I guess from when I was born, I suppose. Obviously, I've always been autistic. Both my parents are autistic, although they don't have diagnoses. But that's how they choose to identify. That hasn't come from me. They just, through me, they gradually realised that actually they both have autism. As do my granddad, who passed away recently, and my mum's mum. So it runs in both of my parents' families. I first got interested in sort of advocacy. I don't really like saying self-advocacy because I feel like a lot of my work is not really about me because I'm just one person, but more, I guess, autism advocacy. So trying to advocate. Not obviously, I can't speak or advocate for all autistic people because obviously I am still just one person. But I put a lot of effort into trying to understand the wider autism community, and to try and reflect that in the different roles that I'm in. So when I say autism advocacy, I'm not trying to say that I represent all autistic people, but just that I don't just represent myself, because I think it's really important to recognise that like I'm a speaking person, but there's a lot of people who are semi-verbal or semi-speaking or non-speaking, and it's really important to amplify their voices. And there's that film that I'm sure you've seen that's been on YouTube, Listen, I think it's called, and that was in response to Sia's film about I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say non-speaking or non-verbal. I think it's non-speaking now, so I apologise if I'm not using the right terminology, but to me what's important is to point people to those resources made by people that issue affects, because it's really important that that we are allies of one another and that we try to amplify one another's voices. I guess I got interested in that stuff when I was about 17, and what interested me was because I was getting bullied in college, further education college, so kind of like community college in the US, and I wasn't. I was told that I was bringing it on myself, and I didn't really understand. And then I read about theory of mind, and I was like, "Oh, okay. So actually, I don't really understand the non-autistic people, and they don't understand me." And so actually, what would probably help is if I could teach them about autism, and they could teach me about non-autistic people, so that kind of it not being like, well, I'm just going to tell you about autism, but like for me personally, I felt like I need to adapt because most of the people I'm interacting with are non-autistic people, and whilst I don't think that non-autistic people should always decide the rules, sometimes, to get a job done, you just have to sort of, lump it. They say like it or lump it. You just got to sort of get on with it. And I could see that, I just didn't have the skills the non-autistic people did. And so that's kind of where I got interested in it, because I could see that was an issue I'd had all through school, that I just didn't understand non-autistic people. I didn't even know that could be an issue. So for me, I know that sometimes theory of mind is spoken about in a really negative way, but I don't actually think it is a negative way. And I think Damien Milton makes a really important point about the double empathy problem, because I do think that non-autistic people have trouble understanding autistic people and vice versa, but I think we all have a responsibility to try our best to understand each other, and I think that is a human thing, and I don't think it really necessarily has anything to do with autism. I think it's just, as humans, to make the planet work, we need to try and understand each other, try and understand our planet, try and understand the other animals within it, and I think that sort of cohesion of us all working together is really important, and that's kind of what inspired me to get involved.
You've written 3 books, but the book I really wanted to talk with you today about is the Autism Friendly Guide to Periods. What was your inspiration in writing this book?
Well, I actually wanted to write, so it was my second book, and I went to Jessica Kingsley Publishers, my publisher, and I wanted to write a book about gender, because I'd met so many people who identify as non-binary, but I don't mean that as in non-binary as in the gender. What I mean is that I've met a lot of autistic people who, say identify as trans or genderqueer or non-binary, as a gender identity, and so I felt very strongly that often, when I was going to parent groups and giving talks and stuff, that people would get very mixed up with sexuality and gender, and they were really often really trying really hard, but they just didn't really get it. And I think that if it's like that thing about, sometimes people ask gay people, when did you decide to be, when did you decide you were gay? And they were like, well, when did you decide you were straight? It's an inbuilt thing. You don't choose it, which obviously makes a parallel with autism as well, because we don't choose that. You are what you are, innit? So I wanted to write something that would try to help the general population because I'm a cis woman, and I kind of thought maybe it would help to have someone like me to write something that might help the wider world understand it. I just thought it might be helpful, but JKP, obviously that could look negatively on me, because you don't want non-autistic people writing about what it's like to be autistic. And the way that I approach my books is that I always do quite a lot of research, and it's not about me, but it's about other people's experience and reflecting that. And so it certainly, I'm not trying to say that I'd want to write a book that was about genders that aren't about my own opinions about it. It would be more that I wanted to reflect the autism community's experience and try and maybe explain some of the things that confuse other people, and to try and help people just better understand it. But JKP kind of steered me away from that and suggested periods, which, to be honest, I wasn't that thrilled about it, because I thought that it was, a bit boring, because, it's a biological function, isn't it? I mean, it is what it is, and I guess I didn't think about it in a particularly in-depth way, but I started the research, and I asked 100 autistic people who have periods about their experience, and 100 non-autistic people who have periods about their experience, and what I found was that a lot of autistic people really needed they really needed the alternatives to tampons and pads. So there's lots of alternative blood collection methods or period products. There's been a move away from saying sanitary products, because that suggests that a period is dirty, and obviously a period isn't dirty, it's a biological function. So a lot of autistic people find the sensory issues with tampons and menstrual pads very problematic, and cloth pads, menstrual cups, and period underwear were real lifesavers for a lot of people. I mean, maybe they didn't literally save their life, but they helped them to manage sensory issues, which in turn helped them to be able to go on about, their everyday life. I mean, obviously they still have a period and there's lots more to it, but it made life so much easier, being able to recognise that you had sensory issues and being able to address them. And then I started to really do a sort of literature review of the books out there, and the first thing I found was that they were all quite gendered. And obviously, if you're trans, you could identify as a trans man, but you could still have periods. Or if you were intersex, you might not identify as male or female, and you could still have periods. Same with being non-binary or genderqueer. And so I felt like it would be important to have a gender-neutral book about periods so that people could see themselves within it. And also, none of them had photos of what a period looked like. And I'm sure you've seen on TV, the adverts with the blue liquid and, that comes out for Beacare. That is not what a period is like in real life. It is not blue. I've never had a blue period, and nobody else reported having a blue period either. So I was like, well, this is ridiculous. Why aren't there pictures? Because another thing that came through the research, both for the non-autistic and the autistic participants, was that sometimes they hadn't had a lot of information given to them about periods, and they didn't really know what to expect, and so sometimes they were frightened, or if the period didn't look the way they were expecting it to look, that was frightening and could be very overwhelming. And obviously, your period starts somewhere between the age of 8 and 16, and so potentially a very young girl could be experiencing periods, and that could be a very scary thing because they have less life experience than, say, a 15-year-old starting their periods. And it can be quite an overwhelming thing. So it seemed important that people reading the book would be able to see what a period actually looks like, and also to maybe take some of the fear out of it. Hopefully from seeing, well, this is what it looks like, and maybe it doesn't look as scary, when you just see it on a book page. And I developed a flap system so that all the images are on grids, and then there's a series of flaps that you can cut out and you can put them over the grid, and so you can control how much of an image, or if you see an image at all, so you're more in control. The other thing was sort of understanding the female anatomy, and I don't know if any of your listeners have watched Orange is the New Black, but there is an episode within that, maybe even a couple of episodes, where there's a trans character, and she explains to everyone how, you have a urethra, which is where your pee comes out of, and then you have a vagina, and that's where your period comes out of, and that's where a man would put his penis if you were going to have sex with a man. Or you could put a dildo, or there's a lot of other things you could put in a vagina, but basically, and a lot of people within that scene didn't know that they had a urethra and a vagina. They didn't know there were two separate holes. And I do think that is reflective of, that there is a lot of people that, because for a lot of people it's so embarrassing to talk about, and so they don't have the knowledge, the words, and so if you don't have the words to say something, then if in the future you ever need to talk to your doctor, well, your urethra and your vagina, your urethra and vagina are two separate holes with two separate jobs. So if you have a problem with one of them, it's important to know which one it is that you have a problem with, and being able to communicate that. And so that was something else that I felt like, well, a lot of these books are a bit, a bit non-concrete, non-explicit is maybe the wrong word in this context, but, for autistic people, it's really important to just say how it is and be like, well, you've got 3 holes, here they are, this is what they look like, this is what they do, this is where they are. Obviously, everybody's body is different, but, your urethra comes before your vagina, and then you've got your vagina, and then obviously between your bum cheeks you've got your anus. So to have that vocabulary would mean that people would be able to ask for help potentially, but also understand information given to them. One of my research participants said that someone had told them to put a tampon up bum, and you don't put a tampon up your anus, you put it in your vagina. But this poor person had tried to put it up their anus, and that's obviously very painful. Because you've got a membrane, like the anus is one way, and you've got this membrane, and so if you try and put a tampon inside it, you're going to tear the membrane, that's going to hurt. And it also is not going to do its job in your anus because the blood is coming out of your vagina. So that you know, those kind of things really inspired me to want to be able to, I guess, help people to better understand their bodies, and also to just create something that was gender neutral, because that seemed like something that nobody else really had done, and it seemed so important. I also met this guy during my research called Cass. I can't remember what his surname is, but Cass had created Cass is openly trans, and he'd done a lot of like advocacy work around that. You know, as a trans man, he has periods, and so it was just, you know, he did a lot of advocacy work around what it's not just people that identify as girls and women who have periods. And also he'd created this colouring book that was about different blood collection methods, and I found his work really inspiring.
Now, just like so many things in life, I'd imagine that there's executive functioning challenges relating to menstruation. Visuals and step-by-step guides can be helpful with lots of these challenges. I'm wondering, though, do you have suggestions on how to better deal with executive functioning for folks in this area?
Yeah, I mean, so with the period particularly, like you said, step by step, I think it's really important when people are developing visuals, like there are visuals in the book, so if you want step-by-step guides, they're there, and there's also some step-by-step guides for like menstrual cups and tampons, and it explains how, it always confused me, the cross-section diagram of the womb and ovaries and vagina, that always confused me, and then I realised how they'd got there. So there's a page that explains how you've got the 3D model that's like face on, and then you turn it to the side, and then you essentially chop the model down the middle. Now obviously it's not a person, it's a 3D model. No one's hurt in this situation, but it's, you know, that's how you get that image. So there are step-by-steps. The other thing that is important for people to bear in mind when they're creating step-by-step visuals for autistic people is that a lot of autistic people struggle with flipping images in their head. So normally when you look at a book, like my right hand would be the person in the book's left hand, and so to try and follow along something can be quite difficult, especially if the image is like front on. Now I can understand why they would draw it front on, but I felt like actually that could be really confusing for autistic people, and I just got the photographer to shoot over my shoulder. I mean, he wasn't actually shooting anything, he was taking photos over my shoulder as I was doing each step. I also felt like I'm not I'm not very thin, I'm quite cuddly, and I felt like it was important that that the image of the person who is like changing the pad and stuff, that was more representative, because often, you know, in books it's like someone who's really thin, and I don't think anyone could say I was really thin. I'm a bit cuddly, so I also felt like it's important that you can recognise yourself in it. Sometimes autistic people need photos of themselves. Sometimes it's okay to have a photo of someone else. Sometimes it's alright to have a cartoon, like it depends on the person. During the research for the book, I visited the Kent Autistic Trust, and they told me about something called the literacy continuum, which is about how people understand information. And what they told me was that objects are something that everybody can understand. Now obviously I'm writing a book, so I can't really include objects in the book because that would make the book too expensive. The next thing is photos with the person whom you're trying to help to learn something in the photo. But again, obviously I can't do that because this book is being sold all around the world and I'm not going to know all of those people. That would be impossible to make a personalised book for each person that was reading the book. That would be impractical. And then so the next level was having somebody else in the photo. So in all of those photos you don't see my face. It's not that you can't see my face, there are pictures in the book of my face, but in the step-by-step, it's those specifically over my shoulder so that you can put the book on the floor in the loo and you can do it. So my right hand will be your right hand. And that's, that's obviously, for me anyway, that was important. A lot of autistic people did talk about executive functioning being an issue, obviously with the period products, but also if people experience PMS, premenstrual syndrome, sometimes it can be called PMT, premenstrual tension. And also it's important to be aware that some people have PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is like acute depression just before your period, so after you ovulate. And what marks it out, or what makes it different from depression, is that it goes away once your period has started. It might take a day or two, but it goes away, whereas obviously depression doesn't go away just because your period started normally. But PMDD is a specific disorder, and if you have PMDD, do go and speak to your family doctor, your GP, because there are things you can do to help, like might be able to have medication at that time of month. You might want to look at contraception, even if you're not sexually active, or you're not sexually active with the opposite sex. You might, it's weird that they say that, if you're not, basically if you have a womb and fallopian tube and ovaries and a vagina, and you're not having sex with people that have a penis, and you wouldn't have to worry about getting pregnant, you might still want to use contraception, like the oral contraceptive pill, because it will help to manage your hormones, because periods are very governed by hormones. So there are a few times within a month where you might have problems with executive functioning, and a lot of autistic people did talk about that. And people, mostly people just talked about sort of trying to have as, sort of planning out when it was. So maybe using apps like Clue, for example, which is a menstrual cycle planning app. And I think it's important to see the whole cycle, not just the period. There's 4 other parts to the cycle, and understanding the emotional and physical symptoms of each of those parts is really important, I think, for people to have that knowledge. And also to know that for lots of people they have a 4-week cycle, but that's not everyone, and it changes quite a lot. Like sometimes you might have a 5-week cycle, sometimes it might be 6 weeks, you might miss a period. And if you're worried, you should talk to your family doctor. Not, don't feel like you're wasting their time. It's really important that if there's a change and you're not sure about it, that you talk to them, because it's better if you do have an issue, like for example polycystic ovaries, it's much better to get treatment early on, and also just to build up that relationship with your GP. So definitely being aware and working out when your sort of executive functioning is most impaired by your menstrual cycle is a really good thing to do. And then might be trying to schedule that particular week or that 2-week period so that you have less demands within it. You might find using more visuals, so when you have good executive functioning, creating some visuals of how to do different things. So I've sort of recently discovered this, that actually I can do loads of cooking in a couple of days, and then I don't have to do any cooking for a week. So if I knew I was going to have a week where my executive functioning was going to be impaired, then it would make sense for me to reduce my executive functioning tasks by not having to cook, but having cooked already. And then also that takes away the having to make a choice about what you're going to eat, because I'll just eat whatever's in the freezer, and it's whatever comes out first. So I do think that, like I said, it's really important to figure out when it is that you have problems with executive functioning, and where possible put strategies in, or to avoid the executive functioning load within that time period.
In talking with autistics that have periods, I've definitely heard about sensory issues that may arise. What are some common sensory issues that might occur in menstruation, and any strategies to kind of minimize this discomfort?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing people talked to me most about was when they were using blood collection products or period products like tampons and um, pads, because like with a pad it can feel a bit damp when you bleed onto it if it gets full. Same, I mean, even if it's not full, it also, they stink when you open them, they smell all plasticky. I mean, obviously it depends a bit on the brand, but lots of people did say, yeah, they smell and they feel all plasticky. And with tampons, you shouldn't feel a tampon when it's inside you, but you can often feel the muscles. So your vagina is a tube of muscle, and obviously the tampon is in there, and it's expanding as it fills with blood. So that obviously it's a sort of ongoing situation, if you like, and so that can cause problems in terms of sensory stimuli. And then you've got to take it out, and it's it's not especially pleasant, and you might have a bit of blood coming out of you after that, and then you have to clear it up, and that can be. I sometimes wonder whether some of these sensory issues are worse for young people because they've got the added anxiety of when they're at school having to work in a small space to like deal with these issues. But that's purely speculation. That it's not like I haven't done any research into that. But the thing I do 100% know about is that people definitely said that blood collection methods, period products, did cause lots of sensory issues, and that's why period underwear, menstrual cups, and cloth pads were so important for people.
Now, for our listeners that want to learn more information about the Autism Friendly Guide to Periods or to purchase the book as well, how would they go about doing so?
Well, if you're in the UK, you can buy a signed copy from my website, which is www.robynsteward.com, which is spelled ROBYNSTEWARD.com. So it's Robyn, like the bird, but instead of an I, it's got a Y, and Steward, so not Stewart, Steward, so it's like stew, and then ard, so it's like cooking a stew, and then half of an aardvark at the end. The beginning of an aardvark, ard. So it's robynsteward.com. If you're in the US, any of the like book retailers it's completely gone out of my head. I want to say Borders, but that's Barnes and Noble. That's it. Yeah, Barnes and Noble. Obviously Amazon. If you're in Canada, bookstores like Chapters or Amazon. If you're in Australia, the distributor is Footprint Books, and the same for New Zealand.
Great. Now you have book number 4 coming out, I believe, and this is another book that I'm really interested in, being an entrepreneur myself, talking about entrepreneurship. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about this book?
Yeah, sure. I think it's actually my third book. It's called The Autism Friendly Guide to Self-Employment, and it is about self-employment, but it's self-employment from a really wide perspective. That there's a lot of people, obviously autistic people, who aren't in work, and there's a lot of people who have like a limited capacity to work. Like for example, I don't mean that in I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean that there are some people, for example, who can't work full time. They need to work part time, or they need to work in a really flexible way. Maybe they're managing other conditions as well as being on the spectrum. So I don't mean that in any disrespect at all. But there are autistic people for whom they need a more flexible way of working, and self-employment can be that. There's also people who, during the research, I met this one guy who has cerebral palsy, and he's non-verbal. He uses PECS to communicate, picture exchange system, and I think he's in his late 20s or early 30s, and because of his physical needs, he has 24-hour care, and rather than go to a day centre or just sit around at home, he actually runs a business doing deliveries, and now he's doing making greeting cards because of COVID, because that means he's out in the community. And I think that there's something about, for me anyway, changing the sort of expectation of a person just being a service user to someone being a service provider. So you can still be a service user, but people just being part of the community. And I think that a few years ago there was that conversation. I don't remember where it came from, and I mean, to me it was very painful, but I think it came from Autism Speaks, and it was about autistic people being burdens. And obviously that is a very negative way of looking at autism, and to me self-employment seems like a way that people can show themselves to the world, because I think that a lot of people struggle to understand autism. They might not know much about it, but I think that one of the ways that we help reduce stigma is by autistic people being very visible. And it's not necessarily about the label, because actually it's not like you're going to walk around with a sign on your head that says, "Hi, I'm autistic." But it's more about just helping people to accept that there's a wide range of people within society, and I think that benefits us all. It's the same with gender. Like, now it's becoming common to see gender neutral toilets, but not that long ago that wasn't particularly common. So that's important. But I think just in general, like, it's not that long ago since there was a film made about it called Silent Minority in the UK. It's not that long ago that people were put in institutions, and I guess the same is true of America and Canada, although I know less of the history there. But it is really important to just be aware that just different people being in the community. It's the same with mental health, just having a wide range of people, because I think that helps everyone to understand each other better. I mean, I live in London, and one of the things I love about London is that I'm around lots of different cultures, lots of different languages, lots of different food, lots of different styles of dress, and for me, I love that, because I think that that's just a really enriching environment to be in. But where I come from, I grew up in a small village in Suffolk, and it's very rural, and within their village, everyone's white. There's and it's, for me, I find that really it makes me a bit uncomfortable, because I'm like, but there's I know that the UK is an island, well, England's an island, but we should be, like, why do, like, if we have a lot of borders and we don't mix with other people, then it creates stigma and misunderstanding. And actually, as a world, we would be much better off if we just all talk to each other and work together. And so for me, being in London, somewhere that's like really cosmopolitan and really, just lots of different people all together, I think that's really important to me. And so I think with people being self-employed, you see a lot of different people. So that, I guess that's why I would like to encourage, so that autistic people are just, out in the world doing things they enjoy. But also, there weren't really books that were about people doing things that they enjoy for their work, and that's why they wanted to be self-employed. So there was a lot of people who were very focused on making money, which, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That's fine, but there were a lot of people like myself who became self-employed because we wanted to do something we were really passionate about, and there weren't that many books on that. There were a few about creative people, but that was kind of it. There wasn't, but there's a lot more out there. Like, during the research, I met this guy called Jeremy Samson, and he is a personal trainer, and he works specifically with autistic people to develop personal training programs for them. And then I met some people two brothers who run a comic book shop. It's not a comic book shop, like, it's a bookshop. They sell comics. They're called Niche Comics. They sell comics and they sell books. Maybe the emphasis on those words was in the wrong place there. But and I met a range of people, and they weren't necessarily in creative industries, but they were doing all kinds of things, and they were, passionate about it. And during the research, I met lots and lots of people. And there was only one person I met who was, like, really focused on money. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, each to your own and everything, but just that I wanted to write something that would help people. Also, there was nothing out there really that dealt with the benefit system, and certainly nothing out there that dealt with the benefit system for self-employed people in 5 countries.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in all the countries I visited, I went and looked through their self-employment, and there were just very little. And actually, there's a lot of people who start a business from nothing, and they might well use the benefit system. And I think that there's a bit of snobbery about that, but actually, the point of the benefit system, is to support people, and ultimately it's much better to have people in work who are able to work, because it means, that they're going to cost the state less money, but also that they're doing something that's, work is good for your mental health. So that's going to ultimately help the system to save money, because they treat less mental illness if people are able to work. And obviously that frees up, because that's not going to work for everyone, that frees up resources for people that work is not possible, or whose mental health hasn't been improved by working. So I think it's a win-win, and it was something that was inspired by a chat I had with a friend called Nicholas, who's like one of my oldest friends, and he'd just become self-employed, and I felt like, I know it. He's not autistic, and I just thought, I know quite a lot about being self-employed, but I don't want to sit there and preach at him. And so I thought, well, if I wrote it in a book and I did some more research, then I could help more people. And then it's there if he wants to use it, or if anyone else wants to use it. And for me, I really hope that it will be useful, and because I know that both the other 2 books have been useful to people, so my fingers are crossed that this will also be useful to people, and people might even be able to start their own businesses from it.
And when is this book going to be released?
Comes out July 21st, 2021.
All right. Well, I will definitely be on the lookout for that. Thanks so much, Robyn, for joining us today and talking about this important subject.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much to Robyn Steward for the conversation. To learn more about Robyn's book, The Autism Friendly Guide to Periods, and to purchase it, check out the link in the podcast description of this episode. If you'd like to learn beyond this podcast how Autism Personal Coach can help coach you to reduce your daily overwhelm and to get the things you want and need in your life, then book a Zoom call with me today. A link to book the call can be found in the podcast description of this episode. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will have a conversation with a high school valedictorian. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.